Well, hello there. Welcome back to Introduction to Philosophy. This is lecture 22, Compatibilism. This is the final lecture in our unit on free will. We're going to be talking about compatibilism and also incompatibilism. Hopefully, it's obvious to you just from the name what compatibilism is. If you knew that we're talking about free will and determinism, and then I told you there's a thing called compatibilism, you should just know. Yeah, I bet that's the view that free will and determinism are compatible with one another. And the opposite of that view is the view that they are incompatible. You can call that incompatibilism. One way of understanding what compatibilism and incompatibilism are all about is they're about what the proper definition of free will is. One thing that's important to keep in mind is you can have a disagreement over the definition of something without having a disagreement about whether that thing exists. So, for example, there might be two people who both agree that God exists, but they have different definitions of God. They might argue about whether God is love or whether God is inconsistent with the existence of suffering in the world. Similarly, you might have people that they agree that free will exists, but they have very different definitions of what free will is. Conversely, you can have people that disagree about whether free will exists, but they both agree on what the definition of free will is. So it's really important to keep in mind that some of the theories we're talking about are theories about whether free will exists, and other theories are theories about what free will would be if there were any. And that latter question, what would it be if there was any, is what we're going to be turning to now when we're studying compatibilism and incompatibilism. When we talk about incompatibilists, people that say free will and determinism are incompatible, you can see, I hope, that they would fall into two groups. One group is the group that says, well, right, they're incompatible and that's why free will doesn't exist. And the other group says, yes, they're incompatible and that's why determinism is false. So the people that say that they're incompatible and determinism is false are people that say that free will does exist. They are incompatibilists. There are other incompatibilists that disagree with them about whether free will exists, even though they agree on what the definition is. Anyway, this might seem confusing to you, and it is. Philosophy is hard. You're supposed to be getting used to that by now. But what is free will? What is the right definition of free will? The compatibilists and the incompatibilists, their fundamental disagreement is over this question. What is free will? Meaning, what would it be if there was such a thing as free will? Compatibilists say that what it would be is something that's fully compatible with the truth of determinism. Where incompatibilists, whether they agree that free will exists or doesn't exist, they say that whatever free will is, it's something that is incompatible with determinism. We're going to get a little bit more into what are some arguments for these different definitions of free will. Let's talk about the logical landscape. What is compatibilism? What are the different ways of opposing compatibilism? What are the different ways of opposing incompatibilism? Now, recall this question that we keep hovering around is the question of whether determinism is compatible with the existence of free will. That's probably like the big question of this unit. And by the way, we're going to be studying the philosophies of some compatibilists in this lecture, lecture 22. Harry Frankfurt and Daniel Dennett are both pretty famous contemporary compatibilists, and they would agree that not only is determinism true, but free will also exists. And they also agree on roughly the same definition of free will, whereby whatever free will is, it's compatible with determinism. In case you care, examples of incompatibilists are Roderick Chisholm and the historical figure Baruch Benedict de Spinoza. We're not really going to study these guys explicitly, but it's nice to know in case you want to look it up, maybe even write a paper about it. But anyways, incompatibilists hold that if determinism is true, then free will does not exist. And logically, equivalent to this if-then statement is another if-then statement that says if free will does exist, then determinism is false. Okay, like I said a little bit ago, there are two kinds of incompatibilists. Even though they agree on the definition of free will, they agree that if there's free will, then there can't be determinism, and vice versa. If there is determinism, then there can't be free will. They disagree about whether there is free will, and also whether there is a determinism. So the first kind of incompatibilist is what gets called in the literature hard determinists. And by the way, sometimes compatibilists get called soft determinists, and it's very confusing terminology. Like a lot of historical, philosophical terms, the terminology is terrible. And if I could go back in time and rewrite it all myself, I would have way better terminology, I promise you. But we're stuck with what we've got. And so there's this contrast between hard determinists, which are kind of incompatibilist, and soft determinists, which are compatibilists. So what do hard determinists say? Well, as you might be unsurprised to learn, hard determinists agree with determinism, but they disagree with the existence of free will. And libertarians are, by the way, not the same as libertarians. By which I mean, libertarians in the metaphysics of free will aren't the same as libertarians as a political philosophy. If you are aware of politics or study political science, you've heard of libertarianism as a view that is generally opposed to government and very much about the liberty of individuals in the political sense of liberty. And we're not really talking about politics here, we're talking about metaphysics. And metaphysical libertarians might politically be somewhere else on the map. They might not be politically libertarians at all, but metaphysically they believe in metaphysical freedom. They believe in a kind of free will that would be completely ruled out by any kind of determinism. One image of free will that you get from hard determinists versus libertarians, well, I don't know if you get it from them. You get it from me. It's an image that I think is useful in keeping in mind. And that is that for libertarians, what it means to be a person is to be like a dune buggy. A dune buggy can go anywhere they want. But according to hard determinists, what it's like to be a person is like being a train. A train can only go where the tracks will lead it. There's really only one way it's going to go. Where a dune buggy can turn left, it can turn right, it can go anywhere and everywhere. It's got so many more options. There's all sorts of things that, in addition to what it does do, what it could have done. The dune buggy, it's always true, it could have done otherwise. But for the train, it's always going to go where the track leads it. So far, we've talked really about three possibilities. You've got compatibilists, and then two kinds of incompatibilists. That adds up to three. 1 + 2 = 3. But you might say, logically, isn't there 4 possibilities? Because logically, what's going on here is we've got a yes or no question about determinism. Is determinism true? Yes or no? And a yes or no question about free will. Yes or no, does free will exist? And that would logically suggest that you've got 4 possibilities. So if you answer yes to both, that gives you compatibilism. If you answer yes to the free will question, but no to determinism, that gives you libertarianism. If you answer no to the free will question, but yes to determinism, that gives you hard determinism. But what about double negative? No, no. What is that? Is there such a thing? Well, that's like a really dark and depressing view, and you don't really come across it a whole bunch in philosophy. In fact, it's so infrequent, I don't even know if there's an official name for it. Whenever I talk about it, I just call it the shit happens view. Shit happens. Things just happen at random, including so-called human actions. It's just this garbage, this noise. Shakespeare said something about a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. I think that comes from either Macbeth or Hamlet. My Shakespeare is pretty terrible. Today, at least. Other days, I'm a full Shakespearean. So that's kind of a shit happens view. things don't happen for reasons. Things don't happen because anybody wills it. So there's no free will, but it's not like everything is predetermined either. There's just no structure. It's just a bunch of noise. So that is a possibility, but most of the philosophical discussions are amongst people that occupy one of the first three categories: compatibilism, or one of the two kinds of incompatibilism, libertarianism versus hard determinism. Let's get deeper into compatibilism. You know, every semester when I lecture about this stuff, I like to ask the students, are you, of these categories, which are you? Are you compatibilists? Are you shit-happensers? Are you hard determinists? Are you libertarians? And my experience is that every semester I get completely different results, and I'm always kind of surprised. Just when I think, like, most of the class is going to be compatibilists, it turns out, like, half of them are hard determinists and the other half are libertarians. And there's other semesters where I get, like, 3 or 4 students that are in the shit happens category, and the rest are distributed either between compatibilists and libertarians, and there's no hard determinists. So it's kind of all over the place. It's kind of interesting that people have views about this and that they disagree so much. But one thing I want you to ask yourself, and you could keep it to yourself if you want, which one are you? What category do you fall in of these 4 categories? Do you say yes, free will exists, and yes, determinism is true? Lots of people think that that's a really weird and puzzling option. They just cannot see how anyone could possibly think that the existence of free will is compatible with determinism. I think that's a really interesting question. Like, how does compatibilism even make sense? And that's what I want to turn to now. And we're going to understand compatibilism by understanding the philosophy of some famous contemporary compatibilists, Harry Frankfurt and Daniel Dennett. And we're going to start with Daniel Dennett. Dennett is still alive as of the writing of this, and I think he's a really great philosopher, and I hope he continues to keep on keeping on. And I want to show you a video where a kind of recent video where he gets interviewed about his views about compatibilism. And I think you'll sense that the person conducting the interview is not a compatibilist, but Dennett does see himself as a compatibilist. And I want you to watch this video. It's 10 minutes long, and pay attention. There's going to be stuff on the quiz about this, and try to get a sense of, like, well, does this make sense? Does Dennett give a good case for how compatibilism can make sense? How in a deterministic universe there really is genuine free will? So why don't you go ahead and watch that video, and I'm going to drink a cup of free will.
Your book on free will, you're framing the issue of free will in a very, what will strike most people as an unusual way. People usually think of free will as opposed to determinism. Mm-hmm. Of course, by determinism we mean the idea that basically the future of this universe is inevitable because the universe is this mechanistic thing. It works according to rules. And in principle, if you understood everything about the state of the universe and everything about the rules that govern it, you could predict what happens tomorrow. And that includes people's brains. They're deterministic. And so free will is kind of an illusion because of determinism, because of the truth of determinism. That's the argument, traditional argument against free will.
That's the traditional argument, yes.
You're saying, I think you're saying that actually the two are compatible in some meaningful sense of both terms.
Absolutely compatible,
okay.
Yes. So I'm just a compatibilist. There have been compatibilists for hundreds of years, but I'm a little different from most of the earlier compatibilists in that I want to deny flat out a premise that you started with, that you mentioned yourself just a minute ago. You said the future is inevitable if determinism is true. First of all, I want to say that phrase, the future is inevitable, just doesn't mean anything. We can't talk. The future is going to happen, whatever it is, and that's true whether determinism is true or indeterminism is true. There's going to be a future. Now, in what sense could you talk about the future being inevitable? I don't know. What we have to talk about is particular events being inevitable, or particular types of events. And in order to see what the word inevitable means, you have to take it apart. And oddly enough, although the word trips off the tongue of everybody who writes about free will and determinism, hardly anybody's ever looked at it. But of course, what it means is unavoidable. I mean, evitable, inevitable, avoidable, unavoidable. That's all the word means. But now, to avoid something, this is something that an agent does, an avoider.
You don't mean a literary agent here.
No, I mean like
Although sometimes they avoid.
sometimes they avoid. No, I didn't have literary agents in mind. I had or secret agents, although those are both agents. I mean agent in the broad sense of being an actor that has some sensory capacities and some goals, and that acts in the world to accomplish its ends.
Okay.
Now, are there agents that can avoid things? Sure. Tons of them. And in fact, the reason you have to look at free will from an evolutionary point of view is that's remarkable. That there are agents that avoid things is a remarkable fact. And there's many more avoiders now than there used to be. And they're much better at avoiding than they used to be. And in fact, it's as good as a definition of intelligence to be an expert avoider, to be able to foresee far into the future, to see things coming down the pike, and to take steps in a timely way to prevent those bad things from happening, and in order to foster things that you want to happen. We don't have a good parallel word. What would it be? Enhancer, probabilifier. There's no. We avoid harm, and we try to get the good. But there isn't a single verb for what we do with regard to good things the way there is for avoiding the bad. But now, that means that the whole concept of inevitability gets its meaning from the perspective in which there are agents, that might want to avoid something. And it might be in their power or it might not. Now, if we start looking at particular worlds with particular agents and particular circumstances in them, we can now start saying, well, in this world, what things are avoidable? What kinds of things are avoidable by this agent, given its powers and its circumstances? And the answer may be, well, if you throw a brick at it, it can duck. Because there's enough light so it'll be able to see the brick, and its nervous system is good enough and its reflexes are fast enough so that it's pretty good at avoiding bricks. However, random lightning bolts is no good at avoiding those. It's just doomed. If there's a lightning stroke coming up in its future, it's toast. There's nothing you can do about that. But if you try to throw a spear at it or something, your chances of succeeding are next to nil, because it's such a good spear avoider. Now, in order to be able to talk this way, in order to partition the universe into the things that are inevitable for that agent or evitable by that agent, we have to have a way of talking about evitability and inevitability in a deterministic world. Now, since there's plenty of evitability in deterministic worlds that we can define, the implication, determinism implies inevitability, is just false. It's just a mistake. It's thousands of years old. It's not been pointed out. It's just a mistake.
So natural selection creates harm avoiders.
Natural selection is an explosion of evitability. We've had huge increases in the degrees of freedom. Mm-hmm. The powers that the products of evolution have, the accrued powers, this is one of the most obvious facts in the physical world. Mm-hmm. It's this growth of evitability. Now, if you look at evitability in that way, then you see that just the traditional philosopher's notion of inevitability just isn't in the same picture.
And you could say that we are future alterers, at least in the sense that had we not evolved the capacities we have for harm avoidance, the future would have been otherwise.
And you have to be very careful when you talk about future alterers.
Right.
Because what are you going to change the future? From what to what?
Since it hasn't happened. But you can talk about what it would have been had I not evolved my,
That's right. Yeah.
whatever it is I
Yeah.
use to avoid harm. But, of course, the reply you get from people is, yes, but you're still saying that given the fact that I have evolved these things, given the condition in which I wake up this morning,
Yep.
and the way my brain is inclined to use these things,
Yep.
the future is inevitable, and my feeling that I need to, well, you certainly hear this as a reply,
You
right?
certainly do, but I'm going to say, what on earth do you mean my future is inevitable?
Well, that again, if you knew that an omniscient being could predict what's going to happen today, and there's no possibility that I will behave in a way that's going to change, that's going to falsify that prediction. That's what people mean.
Well, first of all, that would be true, if I understand you right, in an indeterministic universe too.
Well, no, in that universe, the omniscient being would do the calculation and go, I think this is going to happen, but whoa, caprice enters the picture magically.
No, the omniscient being is going to know the future.
Well, no, omniscient about the present, I mean, and the laws that govern the present.
So you mean a Laplacian demon?
Yeah, Laplacian calculator. And then, but lo and behold, t plus 1 after the prediction is made, caprice enters the picture from we know not where. That's the traditional conception of free will. And people have to let go of that.
That's a traditional conception of free will.
Right.
And what I'm arguing is that it's gratuitous. It does not. The motivation people have imagined for it is simply mistaken. Allowing for quantum indeterminacy, or shall we call it Laplacian indeterminacy, does not give you any more powers, any more freedom, any more avoidability, any more evitability than you have in a deterministic world. It's just an illusion to think that it does.
Okay. You say in the book that, and this is maybe one example, but that free will lacks your conception of the kind of free will that's viable, lacks some of the traditional properties associated with free will. Have we already covered all the traditional properties, or are there other things people are going to have to let go of?
I'll let other people make that calculation. I've tried. I mean, what I claim is that all the varieties of free will that are worth wanting, we can have in a deterministic world. That I can define varieties of free will that are incompatible with determinism, but they're pointless. They don't give you anything that matters. They don't give you. They aren't needed for moral responsibility. They aren't needed to give your life meaning. They are completely gratuitous. They're sort of bizarre metaphysical conceits. They don't pull their weight. You don't need them. Who cares?
That was pretty good. Let's turn to Frankfurt. Harry Frankfurt has some things to say about compatibilism. And we're going to talk about two things in connection with Frankfurt. One of them is this hypothetical scenario, or hypothetical scenarios known as Frankfurt cases. And then the second thing that we're going to talk about in connection with Frankfurt is something known as the hierarchy of desires model of free will. But let's start with the Frankfurt cases. These are like a lot of the philosophy that I focus on in this class. There's thought experiments. I think thought experiments are really fun and interesting, and they allow us to make chemically pure situations that we can use to probe our concepts. So now we're going to probe our concepts of free will and determinism, and also the very closely related concept, moral responsibility. So recall, whenever I talk about determinism, I emphasize that there's two parts to determinism. One of them that's really important is the idea of whether you could have done otherwise. Determinists say you cannot have done otherwise. For any given event, any happening, anything in which you're doing something, that's the one you had to do. You could not have done otherwise. Now, is that not being able to do otherwise, is that compatible with free will? Especially, is it compatible with free will in the sense required for moral responsibility? Is not being able to do otherwise compatible with being morally responsible for something? That is the question addressed by Frankfurt cases. And now we're going to tell a little story where you're going to see what Frankfurt's argument is. So in this story, we've got two characters, A and B, call them Alicia and Beyonce. They are Beyonce? Sorry. Beyonce. No relation to the famous Beyonce, by the way. Alicia and Beyonce are roommates, and Alicia and Beyonce, they're kind of, they're like, I don't know if you'd call them friends. Their relationship is very strained, but they're roommates nonetheless. And Alicia is, quite frankly, a little bit bossy and controlling and really hyper. And her roommate B is kind of cool and laid back, and nonetheless is in a situation where she owes a favor to A. And the favor is A, Alicia, she's got some friends and family coming over. She's going to be throwing a party at their apartment. And for some reason, B is supposed to do all the cleaning for the party. In preparation for the party, she's supposed to do all the cleaning. She lost a bed or something. I forgot how it goes, and it doesn't matter. But anyways, ahead of time, B promises that she will do all the cleaning. Now, A, Alicia, did not put a gun to Beyonce's head. Beyonce agreed. And she said, I promise, the day before the party, I will do all the cleaning, I'm going to do all the vacuuming, etc., in preparation for the party. Now, Alicia, if she was cool, she would just take Beyonce's word for it, right? Just, okay, she said she's going to do it, then all right. Wait and, trust that she'll do it. But Alicia is not like that. She is not chill. She has to guarantee that this gets cleaned. And darn it, she's not going to do it herself either. What she does instead, in order to guarantee that Beyonce ends up doing the cleaning on the day that she promised to do the cleaning, is that one night while Beyonce is sleeping, Alicia sneaks in her room and puts a chip in her brain. She puts a remote control device inside of Beyonce's brain so that Alicia, if she needs to, can press a button and will make Beyonce clean the house. Okay, so the agreement is that on Wednesday, which is the day before the party's on Thursday, Beyonce is supposed to clean the house. Earlier that week, Alicia put a chip in Beyonce's brain, and that chip is remote controlled. Now, what's going to happen is if Beyonce decides that she's not going to clean, Alicia's going to press the button that has this override mechanism that activates the chip and will make Beyonce clean. Okay? So regardless of what Beyonce decides to do, whether she decides to follow through her promise and clean or doesn't, she is going to clean, because if she decides to try to not clean, then Alicia is going to press the button that's going to turn Beyonce into a robot and do the cleaning. Okay? So that's the hypothetical scenario. The hypothetical scenario is that unbeknownst to Beyonce, she is going to clean whether she decides to or not. Because if she decides not to, then that button is going to be pressed that's going to make her do it anyway. So, question. Is it true when Beyonce does clean that she could have done otherwise? So let's say Wednesday rolls around and Beyonce gets out of bed and says, you know what, I'm going to keep my promise, I'm going to go clean. And she starts cleaning, and she cleans and cleans until she gets all the cleaning done. Alicia never has to push the button. Question, could Beyonce have done otherwise than clean? No, because even if she tried to not clean, then she still would have ended up cleaning because Alicia would have pushed the button. So, question, could Beyonce have done otherwise? Answer, no, she could not have done otherwise. And so in that sense of determinism, Beyonce's cleaning was fully determined. It was determined that she was going to clean. One way or the other, she was going to end up doing the cleaning. Now, on the particular day that she did clean, no button was pushed activating any microchips in her brain. Question, is she morally responsible for the cleaning that she does? If, for example, there was payment due, do you pay her after she does the cleaning? And what if while cleaning she decided to cut some corners that she knew would end up killing somebody, wouldn't you say she was responsible for their killing? Right? She's like, you know what? I'm going to make this house real clean by using this cleaning fluid that is going to make fumes go up into the apartment above it, and it's going to kill the small children that are there. Isn't she morally responsible for that? You might say, yes, she's morally responsible for that. But could she have done otherwise? If the chip was going to get pushed and make her do it anyway, then she could not have done otherwise. But isn't she still morally responsible? So the point of the Frankfurt cases is to spell out a scenario where two things are true. Two things are supposed to just be obvious by just to the light of reason. It's obvious that number one, the person in question, person B, Beyonce, could not have done otherwise. And two, nonetheless is morally responsible for the outcomes. If moral responsibility is what you need for free will, then even though she couldn't have done otherwise, she still has free will. And so that's supposed to be an argument for compatibilism. What is free will? If free will is going to be the sort of thing that it's compatible with determinism, what is it? And here we get from Frankfurt something known as the hierarchy of desires model. In order to understand what the hierarchy of desires model is, we have to understand how desires can be in a hierarchy. And if you know about hierarchies, you know you've got some kind of structured system where some things are higher and some things are lower. So for example, in the chain of command in the military, you've got people that have higher authority than others. They have the ability to give orders, and others are obligated to follow those orders. That's a hierarchy where you've got a hierarchy of rank, of authority. Other sorts of hierarchies are like what we're going to have in this example. We've got two kinds of desires: lower order desires and higher order desires. And what it means for them to be lower versus higher order means whether the desires are desires about other desires, or instead are they desires about things that aren't desires. So take, for example, beer. I desire beer. Now, what is beer? It's a kind of delicious liquid. But what's a desire? Well, a desire is a mental state. Is beer a mental state? No, it isn't. Apologies to idealists, but beer exists independently of the mind. It's a real thing. Perhaps the most real thing, beer. So lower order Larry has a desire. What's the desire a desire for? What's it a desire about? It's a desire for beer. Now, is beer a mental state? No, it's not a mental state. Since it's not a mental state, it's not a desire. Beer is a liquid that you put in a bottle. It's not a mental state. So his desire is a desire for something that is not a desire, so therefore it is a first order desire. But now suppose we got this other guy, instead of Larry, his name is Harry, higher order Harry. Harry has, amongst other desires, he's got some higher order desires. These are desires about desires. And you might say, that sounds like a weird thing. Who wants that? Well, lots of people have desires about desires. You might have desires that you find to be dangerous or just make your life difficult. Like you really, really love gambling. And you also notice that like gambling really messes up your life. And you wish you didn't love gambling so much. Or maybe you're trying to quit smoking. And you see somebody smoking a cigarette at a party and you smell it. And it just seems so good. You really desire to have a cigarette right now. But also you're trying to quit smoking. So you desire to no longer have that desire. You're like, I wish I didn't want to smoke that cigarette so badly. So the idea of desires about desires is actually a very familiar idea. And what Frankfurt does is to take that idea and employ it in a framework explaining what free will is supposed to be. Free will is something like when you have desires that you endorse, desires that you fully approve of. Those are the desires that when you act on them, that counts as acting of your own free will. So imagine a scenario where somebody, they have a desire to quit smoking, but in a moment of weakness, they smoke anyway. So why are they smoking right now? Well, they're smoking because of this first order desire for a cigarette. But they had a higher order desire to not desire to smoke cigarettes. So they didn't endorse that first order desire. So they're not really acting of their own free will. what it would be to be acting of your own free will is to be acting in accordance with the desires that you fully approve of. So, for example, maybe you're a Kantian and you believe that you should always tell the truth, and then you desire to always tell the truth, and then one day you desire. Sorry, you're a Kantian, so you desire to always tell the truth, and one day you tell the truth when you felt like it, and you're like, oh, awesome. Not only did I want to tell the truth, but I wanted to want to tell the truth. And now I feel so free. Sound weird? Well, the idea is that when things are going according to your, not only according to your plans, but according to your plans for your plans, that's what it means to be free. You're in full possession of yourself, and so therefore you're acting freely. But the person who only has first order desires, or the person who only acts on their first order desires, they're really not free at all. They're like an animal or a machine. They're just reacting like reflexes. And that's not like free. Free will is more like when you think about it and you do what is best based upon long, careful thought. Thought that's so careful that you're thinking about thinking. That's free will. Okay, let's switch gears slightly and talk about some of the pros and cons of compatibilism. In general, like, is this a good theory or is it in general a bad theory? So one advantage of compatibilism is that your actions can be fully determined, which would be consistent with science that tells us that determinism is true. And you could still be free. And what it means to be free is to be doing what you want, or maybe doing what you want in a higher order sort of way, a higher order endorsed way. So the advantage here is like the advantage of having your cake and eating it too. It sounds good to have free will. Isn't that good to have free will? To think of yourself as free and you're morally responsible, and you're the sort of person who can keep promises and deserve the rewards that you get and the punishments that you get. That sounds good. But also, you live in a universe that makes sense. It's consistent with our best science about how people and the universe in general works. Now, what about so-called random actions? Well, random actions on this view, they wouldn't be free because those aren't the result of your beliefs or desires or intentions. You might say that all makes sense. That sounds like a good view of how people work. But are there objections? Well, there's some alleged objections. One of the objections says, on this model of free will, this compatibilist model, maybe there's not enough freedom. Like based on what we think free will ought to be, you wouldn't get enough. You might say, well, there's lots of situations in which you can't do what you want, so you wouldn't be free then. I frankly don't see the force of this. I don't think most people that believe in free will believe in omnipotence, right? If God exists, God is all powerful, so God can do whatever he wants. But people aren't supposed to be omnipotent, but they nonetheless have free will, right? Not that I'm advocating a religious perspective, but here's a religious perspective. Only God is omnipotent. God creates people who aren't omnipotent, but they nonetheless have free will. They are free to do some things, and within that scope of what they're able to do, they have choices that they can make. Some of those choices are good, some of those are evil. Some of those choices they're going to go to heaven for, some of those choices they're going to go to hell for. That's a pretty typical way of thinking about free will. Free will doesn't mean that you are omnipotent. Free will means that there are some cases in which you do things because you wanted to do them. Or you do things in such a way that it's true that you could have done otherwise. The compatibilist says what it means is that it's determined in a special sort of way. Yes, everything is determined, says the compatibilist, but not everything is free. Which things are free? The things that come about based on your own desires for them to come out. And if you believe in the higher order, hierarchical model, there's special kinds of desires that you have to have before the resulting action counts as free. Well, what's this objection? The objection says maybe there's too much freedom. Well, this is a bit more interesting. This suggests that there are certain things that obviously shouldn't count as free, but would count as free anyway. So, for example, suppose someone puts a gun to your head and says "cluck like a chicken," and then you cluck like a chicken. Were you acting of your free will when you clucked like a chicken? You could see a compatibilist saying yes, because you had some desires. You desired to not get your brains blown out. And so therefore you're acting in accordance with your desire, and so therefore you're acting of your free will. Now a lot of people might say, no, it's obvious that if you got a gun to your head, then you're not really free. Now, is the compatibilist forced here? I think the compatibilist can go either way. A compatibilist could build into their model a theory of coercion, and if they wanted to, they could say that, look, if there's certain things that count as coercion, and even though they involve causing your desires, and the desires cause your actions, that doesn't count as free will. Or in other words, they could say not just any desire-caused action would count as acting freely. So they could build into their model, if they wanted to, that what it means to act freely is to have your actions caused by desires that you endorse, and those desires were not put into you via coercion, where an example of coercion is someone putting a gun to your head. But you got to wonder if they can adequately explain what coercion is supposed to be. Because there's all sorts of things that aren't coercion. Like, for example, advertising, right? Like if I have a really attractive person, whatever you regard as attractive, someone you find attractive, they're in a commercial drinking beer. That might make you want that beer more than you otherwise would have. Now, they're not putting a gun to your head. And when you go and buy that beer, is that less free? The beer bought because you were influenced by advertising, is that beer that's bought of your own free will? Here's a slightly different example of a similar sort of thing. Remember in lecture 20 when we were talking about different scientific experiments that were supposed to show that free will was an illusion? One of the experiments that we talked about was the Nisbet and Wilson pantyhose experiment. And if you recall, in that experiment, people were shopping for pantyhose, and there was all these different piles of pantyhose on the display table. And after they purchased their pantyhose, they were supposed to write a little questionnaire explaining why they chose the ones that they chose. And they would say things that arguably were just confabulations, just post hoc rationalizations, after the fact rationalizations. They said things like, I bought it because it was stronger, I bought it because it was more beautiful. But objectively, that's false. That's not why they bought it, because it wasn't more beautiful, it wasn't stronger, because the scientists set it up so that actually all the pantyhose was just the same. What was really going on is that people that were right-handed generally prefer pantyhose that was displayed on the right side of the display. Now, they didn't know that about themselves. They didn't know that's why they were choosing it. And we can describe the situation like this. They have an unconscious desire for things that are located on the right side. They're not aware that they have that desire. They think they desire things because they're stronger or more beautiful, but really they just desire it because it was on the right side. Question: are they getting what they want? If what they're getting is what they wanted unconsciously, is that good enough for free will? Or is that an example illustrating that free will is an illusion? Let's switch now and talk about incompatibilism. We've seen what compatibilists say free will is supposed to be, but let's see what incompatibilists say free will is supposed to be. Now, one of the main accounts of free will that comes from incompatibilists is an account called agent causation. Agent causation is a hypothetical form of causation, which is really different from regular causation. Regular causation is what we could call event causation. Event causation is the causation that you encounter in most parts of the natural world. So, let's say there's a lightning bolt that causes a tree to catch on fire. There's an example of causation, and the relationship, the causal relationship is between two events. We've got one event, which is the lightning bolt striking, and we've got another event, which is the tree catching on fire. And in that example of causation, causation is a relationship between events. And you might say causation is a little bit more complicated than that. What it means for the one event to cause the other event is that the two events are part of a larger pattern of events. And this should remind you of the lecture on empiricism where we talked about Hume and the theory of causation back then. What it means for one event to cause another event is that there's a whole pattern of events. There's a whole bunch of lightning strikes and a whole bunch of trees catching on fire. And statistically speaking, the tree is more likely to catch on fire if there's been a lightning strike than not, or vice versa. Like if there's a lightning strike, a tree is more likely to be caught on fire than otherwise. It's because of this pattern of events that we can say that these two events are related causally. And you might say, that's what causation always has to be. Causation always has to be a relationship between events. One event causes another event. One event is the cause, the other event is the effect. And even when we're talking about people, agents, agent is another word for person or people in this context. Even when we're dealing with agents causing things, what's really going on is event causation. So think about all that stuff we said about desires and intentions. So a pizza gets eaten. That's an event. What caused the pizza to get eaten? Well, you don't simply say Pete Mandic caused it to get eaten. If you really give a full account of what caused the pizza to get eaten, you have to say stuff about events that involve Pete Mandic. Like, for example, Pete Mandic there was this event of Pete Mandic becoming very hungry. And then there's this other event of Pete Mandic noticing there was some pizza left over. Those events caused the pizza to get eaten. But the incompatibilist says, no, when it comes to free will, there's a special kind of causation, which is agent causation. What caused the pizza to get eaten? Answer, according to the agent causation theory, the answer is Pete Mandic caused it. Not some event inside Pete Mandic, not some decision Pete Mandic made or some desire Pete Mandic had. Well, why does the agent causation person want to say that? Well, they want to deny that event causation applies there because otherwise it looks like determinism is going to come into the picture. If it's some state of my mind or my brain that led to my actions, then, well, isn't that itself determined by something else? So the agent causation theorist is trying to make people into an exception to what usually happens in the universe. There's a special kind of causation, agent causation, where the answer to the question, why the pizza got eaten, is simply Pete Mandic. Pete Mandic is why the pizza got eaten. The agent caused the event, not some other event caused the event. One way we can understand agent causation as is something that's responding to the dilemma argument. Remember the dilemma argument from the previous lecture. The dilemma argument is basically saying, look, there's this dilemma. Either determinism is true or determinism isn't true. Either determinism or indeterminism. And further, the dilemma argument is assuming that the falsity of determinism just is randomness. And what the agent causation people are saying is that there's a third option. In addition to things being determined and things just happening randomly, there's this third thing, which is things being caused by agents. Not by events involving the agents, but just simply by the agents themselves. If there is that third option, then you don't really have a dilemma. And if you don't really have a dilemma, then the dilemma argument doesn't work. So that's why we say agent causation is a response to the dilemma argument. The agent causation theory is saying that there is an alternative to both determinism and randomness, and so therefore it's not really a dilemma. One way of putting agent causation is to say that on this theory, the agent causation theory, human beings can spontaneously begin new chains of causation in the world. There's not some prior event that happened prior to the person being born or prior to the person choosing that made the person choose. That just choosing itself comes out of nowhere, and that introduces new chains of causation in the world. So if we go back to that picture of the person pushing the dominoes with their finger, the agent causation person would say, look, it's not like the Big Bang caused their brain to push the dominoes. What's happening is that there's this person, and the person, they decided to push the dominoes. You might say, well, what about their brain? Didn't their brain make them decide? And didn't like nature and nurture make their brain that way? And they would say, no, humans are special. Humans introduce a new element into the universe, an element that introduces causes without itself being caused. If you think back to arguments for the existence of God, and you think back to the cosmological argument for the existence of God, where God was the unmoved mover, God was the first cause. Well, one way of hearing what agent causation is supposed to be is that people are like little gods. They are their own first causes. They can cause things without them, the people, or at least the people's decisions, themselves being caused. Each decision is an uncaused cause. Just like God creating the universe from nothing. Now, you might say, that's very mysterious. Agent causation sounds very mysterious. You might say, agent causation sounds like magic. And you might say, that's bad. Like, that's just not answering anything. Philosophy is supposed to give you answers and knowledge and understanding, and you're just introducing mystery and magic should remind you of miracles, which we examined Hume's argument against way back in lecture 19. Aren't mysteries and magic bad? So the mystery objection says that if agent causation is right, then it's just mysterious how to explain actions. For any human action, it's just shit happens. Why did she eat pizza instead of a banana? Is it because she wanted the pizza? According to agent causation, no. If you say she ate the pizza because she wanted the pizza, well, that's event causation. That's not agent causation. Agent causation is just like she just ate the pizza. I don't know what happened. Wasn't she on a diet? Yeah, but then she ate the pizza. Whoa, it's a mystery. And you might say this actually goes against the normal way we understand each other, that we understand each other as rational, and we have reasons, and we act for reasons. Where this makes everything super just spontaneous, creation ex nihilo, getting something from nothing. You might say the problem here is it's a kind of magic. And one of the problems with this kind of magical agent causation might be that what it's doing is violating the laws of physics. Some of you might be familiar with the idea of the conservation of energy. Energy can be neither created nor destroyed. And you could think of causation in the physical universe as always involving a transfer of energy. So if you're going to move a boulder up a hill, you have to burn a certain amount of energy in order to do that. You can't get something from nothing. Energy is neither created nor destroyed. It's just moved around from place to place. But if humans are like these wormholes in which energy comes out into the universe, then you're actually adding to the amount of energy in the universe. And you might say, what's that got to do with causation? Well, if they are starting causal chains, you've got physical events that, right? So like if I use my free will to pick up this mug, well, what is making the mug move? It has to be something that is outside the nexus of cause and effect. But that would seem to be creating energy. That would be adding to the total amount of energy in the world, and thus violating the principle of the conservation of energy. Okay, so what have we talked about today? We have talked about compatibilism, and you should understand what compatibilism is and what incompatibilism is, and what the main options are, what the definitions of libertarianism and hard determinism are. You should understand what the main views of Dennett and Frankfurt are. And with the Frankfurt stuff, that means you've got to understand Frankfurt cases and also what the hierarchy of desires model is. And then there was this thing on the incompatibilist side, which was agent causation. Agent causation was a proposal about what free will would be, which is something arguably very magical and mysterious. Okay, let's hit some study questions and then call it a unit. We're going to say that's it for the free will unit after these study questions. Okay, study question 1. The proposition that either we have no free will or determinism is false is A, the incompatibilist thesis, B, the principle of doubt, C, the dilemma argument about free will, D, the improbability drive, or E, the fallacy of petitio principii. By the way, shout out to fans of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy that understand that option D is a reference to that. Study question 2. Dennett denies A, the compatibilist thesis, B, determinism, C, that free will exists, D, that beards are cool, or E, that the future is inevitable. Are beards cool? Probably not. Study question 3. The point of so-called Frankfurt cases is to show that A, the existence of free will does not entail an ability to do otherwise. B, free will and determinism are incompatible. C, the best model of free will is the ultimate origination model. D, the best model of free will is the agent causation model. Or E, if you get really hungry, your best friend will look like a giant hot dog. And here's the answers to the study questions. The answer to number 1 is A. The answer to number 2 is E. And the answer to number 3 is A. And that brings us to the end of the free will unit. We're running out of units, ladies and gentlemen. Pretty soon we're going to be done with the whole class, the whole semester. But coming up next is my favorite one. We're going to be talking about the mind-body problem, starting with lecture 23. Until next time, I am Dr. Mandic, and you are a philosophy student. Have a good day.